If you see BMW motorcycles of recent times, you will see bikes with big beaks or asymmetrical lamps, snazzy graphics, carbon fiber wings. Now, they say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so these bikes may or may not look appealing to you. But I think you'll agree with me when I say this, that while they look aggressive, sporty, racy, none of them really look elegant until you chance upon this, the BMW R18. Irrespective of what your background, sports bikes, nakeds, adventure bikes, I think this design will certainly look appealing to you. But it's not just you, it's also the traditional cruiser buyer that BMW is aiming to attract with this motorcycle. And I think in doing so, they've created something phenomenal. Which is why BMW has gone back to its roots when its designs were indeed elegant and simple. Drawing inspirations from the R5 of the 1930s, the R18 has simple shapes and lines that not only help it get the right stance for a cruiser, but also gives it the classic styling cues that will attract devotees of the modern retro genre of motorcycles. The limited first edition R18 seen here comes with hand-painted pinstriping on the tank and the fenders. The black paint has sparkles in them that gleam in the sunlight, and then there are the riveted Bavarian roundels on the tank made in the optional enamel to complete the 30s look and feel. The modern day equipment includes powerful LED lamps, discrete cable routing, suspension that isn't electronically controlled but has modern mechanicals, rider aids that ensure safety, and a simple hybrid instrumentation that packs basic info. The monolith design is minimal on the eye. There are a ton of optional accessories that can transform the R18 in many ways. It is hard to imagine this bike in any other color than black and chrome. I had a chance to ride the R1200C back in the day, but BMW's second attempt at the cruiser segment with the R18 seems far better thought of. Neither does the R18 have the paralever or telelever suspenders, nor does it have any lumpy bodywork that made the 1200C look like a love child between a GS and a street naked. All of the R18's curves look graceful. It wears elegant stockings that cover the front forks, while the rear has a cantilever suspension neatly tucked away in a modern subframe and swing arm combination that looks old school by forming a triangle with the double cradle frame's backbone. I had a bit of a selfish motive reviewing this motorcycle because I want to be shot riding this motorcycle. I want photographs that I can frame and cherish years from now because I truly believe that this is a timeless design. The engine is another marvel of engineering and design. The injectors have gone inside the cylinder heads and there are push rods on top of the cylinders to achieve that clean design. The spark plugs, ignition wires, throttle bodies and the starter motor have been cleverly hidden away from plain sight. The Boxer Twin attracts attention just as intended. And you will feel proud or scared of riding it through the crowd. There's plenty of chrome to clean and shine. Cylinder heads, the fishtail pipes, the engine casing, and then there is also the badge on the engine that proudly announces to the world that this mill is an 1800cc engine, the largest Boxer BMW's ever produced. The engine comes to life in the traditional characteristic Boxer manner, starting off with a judder, pushing a little to the left and then settling into a lumpy idle. The engine is air and oil cooled, though the oil cooler sits in a very vulnerable position. And while you may not notice it really, the left cylinder is slightly further ahead, the right cylinder sits closer to the rider. Now the longitudinal crankshaft, it has three main bearings. There is one between the two 180-degree rod journals, so that separation gives this engine its characteristic sound. And there is no balancer shaft, so it also gives it a lot of vibrations and clunks, which is very old school. Now these vibrations, they rise as the revs rise as well, and that reminds the rider that you are supposed to short shift with an engine like this and also ride that wave of torque. The engine has a lot of poke, enough to run away from other cruisers and in the hands of a seasoned rider even keep up with some of the faster motorcycles like the Thruxtons and the R90s. The engine's output isn't in the power cruiser territory, but a tested 0 to 100 sprint time of 4.97 seconds should tell you that this cruiser is quick. Power is fed to the rear wheel via an exposed shaft drive, which BMW assures will withstand the elements. Too bad that you can't see that shaft spinning when you're riding the motorcycle. That would have been just epic. Now there is no tachometer, but you will immediately realize that you aren't really revving too high with this engine. It redlines at about 5,500 RPM, and the figures suggest that all of the torque is available between 2,000 to 4,000 RPM. So whether you are riding in the city, cruising on the highway, or even tackling the bends, there is a meat of torque, and it's always available at your disposal. It will pull from 30 kilometers an hour in third all the way up to the triple-digit speeds. It is equally impressive at building speeds in higher gears, meaning that even at highway speeds, you won't have to drop a gear to pull an overtake. The engine can cruise happily between 90 to 130 kilometers an hour, whatever makes you feel comfortable considering the wind blast. There is a touring windscreen available, of course, that should help, but I think while it will fit the purpose, it will kill the aesthetic of this motorcycle. The front end design, the sheer flow of it, I think all of that will go with that one big piece of glass sticking in front of you. I think the best way to enjoy this motorcycle is to plonk in a pair of earplugs in your ear, cut out that wind noise, cruise at about 120 kilometers an hour, and let that Boxer and its transmission play a nice symphony for you. There are 3 riding modes to choose from: rain for the wet, and roll and rock for the sunny days. Rain will dial down performance for better grip and keep the traction control on high alert. Roll will keep things smooth and tidy for city use, while rock will bump up the low end performance, amplify the throttle response and engine braking, and allow a bit of rear wheel slip under hard acceleration. There's an engine drag control function which limits the sliding of the rear wheel under downshift when you do it on slippery surfaces, and that certainly comes in handy on our road conditions. This 345 kilo cruiser is quite charming in the twisties too. The meaty torque spread lets you ride in third all throughout if you like, and if you up the spirits, the gearbox will complement with slick shifts, even clutchless shifts if you like. My only gripe with this package is that the engine never sounds loud enough to go with those spirited rides. Of course, there are the crackles and pops in the rock mode, but it's like listening to soft rock on a Saturday night. Nothing wrong with it, just that it mellows the vibe instead of amplifying it. I expected better music from an 1800. That said, once you experience the almost R90 level of hooliganism from the rock mode of the R18, it's very difficult to go back to roll. It just feels lackluster in comparison. There's no doubt that this engine is a cracker of a performer. There's also no doubt that BMW could have easily got a similar performance from a lesser capacity Boxer engine. This 110 Ci is more of a spec requirement to lure the typical customer base who is smitten by those American brands and their big pistons. I'm sure Mr. Schwarzenegger would have loved to ride a BMW, and if he did that in Terminator, I'm not sure if things would have been different today. If pure numbers and a neck-breaking performance is what you seek from a cruiser, the Rocket 3 could be a far convincing motorcycle for you. But if you would rather flaunt a piece of art on 2 wheels, it is the R18 all the way. On a BMW motorcycle that costs upward of 26 lakh rupees, you expect a plethora of electronics. But the most advanced piece of tech that you get on this particular motorcycle is a mode selector. Sarcasm. Now, the lack of a digital display or a digital instrumentation in today's times on a BMW is still possible in favor of this beautiful design, but the lack of a fuel gauge, a lack of a fuel trip computer, or the lack of a cruise control, that might make you feel shortchanged. You do get keyless ignition, but you have to flip a key to lock or unlock the handlebar. And speaking of locks, you don't get one for the fuel filler. What you also don't get is an IMU, which means that the hill start assist, which is a very good feature to have, isn't as smooth as the one on the R1250. Fine, there is one piece of advanced tech, and that is a reverse gear, which essentially spins the starter motor in reverse to get you out of a tricky parking spot. But this particular motorcycle isn't equipped with one because it is an optional extra. The R18 has link brakes, meaning the front lever will activate all 3 calipers. There is no IMU trickery, however, unlike most machines of this price. But the brakes work well even in corners and leave little to no room for complaint. Braking on the R18 is rear biased, of course, and despite what the heft and the body style would suggest, there isn't a pronounced nosedive. The brake lever feel is quite progressive both for the front as well as the rear. And this bike actually stops better than some of the sportier nakeds that we've tested in the past. So coming to terms with the braking is not a big deal at all. Speaking of winding roads, the R18 doesn't turn in as sharply as, say, the R90. Instead, it gives you the sensation that it rolls from its side to side over its fat tires like a typical low-riding cruiser. And yet there is a sense of control and stability that soon turns into a fun ride, even if you are setting off sparks often from the hinged foot pegs. In fact, the low cornering clearance of the foot pegs is the only limiting factor for the R18 around the bends. The stock handlebar doesn't feel too wide, and though you can't move around much in the seat, the riding posture never feels awkward even around the bends. Now, whether it was Arnold and the fat boy from Terminator that made you a cruiser head, or you just like cruiser motorcycles for what they are, the ergonomics of the R18 are welcoming for most riders of most shapes and sizes. If you have a bigger belly, however, the knees up riding position of this motorcycle may not feel as accommodating, may not feel as comfortable. You might find the forward set foot pegs of a typical cruiser a lot more comfortable to ride long distances. That said, for my height of 5 feet 8, I feel very comfortable on this motorcycle. I took all of 10 minutes of riding in the traffic to get used to the motorcycle, come to terms with its size and its overall riding posture. Speaking of riding in traffic, however, the engine does heat up a little bit and your shin and your feet are going to feel that heat, but it never gets too uncomfortable. The rear cantilever setup uses a ZF shock, while the front employs 49mm conventional Showa forks. Adjusting the rear suspension will need you to take off the rear seat. Now that will sound like work or cumbersome only if you're going to have a pillion and a pillion seat. If you're going to be celebrating your singlehood with just the single seat, with just the rider seat in place, it's going to be more of a tune it, shut it, forget it operation. The front and the rear suspension have 119 and 89mm of travel respectively, which is on par with cruiser expectations. But the low speed ride is bone jarring, and you are going to feel every undulation on the road, in your back and your shoulders. Ride it hard, however, and it smoothens out most of those undulations. The saddle is comfortable up to 200 kilometers, but anything beyond that will get cumbersome. But the R18 will ensure that those 200 kilometers will be quite rewarding with its alluring performance and its ability to turn heads. There are motorcycles that impress with numbers, and then there are motorcycles that promise and deliver on a unique experience. And it's the latter that leaves that long-lasting impression on your mind. The R18 falls in that category. From the first glance and the first ignition to the last mile of the day, it promises your senses an unique experience. In fact, it's not very easy to do, but the R18 does it, and does it rather well, better than most other cruisers out there.